This is typical of TLR now. They're not honest about what they're doing, and they mislead people to get support and get money and try to weaken people like me.
I think that donors probably are I don't want to say that they're being sold a bill of goods, but they're not getting the full story of what's going on if the pitch is solely focused on what the successes were.
Texans for Lawsuit Reform is the most powerful political action committee in the state by any objective measure, a position it's maintained for years. Over the course of our investigation into TLR, the size and might of its PAC and war chest was mentioned repeatedly, especially in connection to lawmakers and their fear of crossing them. The group has pumped millions into races across the state for decades, spending that affords the organization considerable political access in Austin. While the majority of their spending is in service of protecting incumbent lawmakers from grassroots challengers, a friendly posture towards incumbents isn't universal. This is especially true of candidates preferred by conservative voters. Last year's public relations campaign to advance the impeachment of Ken Paxton was just the latest and most visible instance of the organization's hostility towards conservatives. In this episode of Exposed, we'll examine TLR's war chest, how some would argue their donors are being taken for a ride, and figure out who they are truly empowering. From Texas Scorecard, I'm Valerie Munoz, and this is Exposed, the Beast of Austin.
Is justice for sale in Texas?
TLR, I think, can crown itself with the laurel that they are responsible for taking a legal system and turning it into the model.
I think because of their power and their ability to raise lots of money from very wealthy people in Texas, they view themselves as invincible.
It's morphed into a beast of Austin.
I think Texans for Lawsuit Reform has long since passed its prime. It is on another path. It should just go away.
Basically, a lot of legislators were afraid of TLR. You wanted them on your side. You didn't want them opposed to you because they were effective at what they did.
A high percentage of the House members depend on TLR for most of their money. They don't depend on their constituents. They don't depend on the people who elect them. And so they don't listen to them. They listen to TLR.
One reason lawmakers fear TLR is its massive campaign account. How well armed is TLR financially? According to Transparency USA, the organization has raised over $87 million since 2015. TLR is the largest privately directed political action committee in Texas, with $29 million currently on hand. Last cycle alone, the PAC raised $37 million and spent $17 million. The next largest PAC in Texas, controlled by realtors, has a third of what TLR controls in cash on hand, with just over $10 million. This massive bank account gives TLR an advantage in influencing lawmakers. From the beginning, TLR has had a focus on raising money to engage in political campaigns, and their involvement has followed the arc of the organization from needed disruptor to entrenched establishment. Here's Dick Weekly talking about the group's early efforts to change the makeup of the Texas legislature.
We then got heavily involved in politics, beat 3 state senators, which, of course, back then, no one went against incumbent. We went against 3 incumbent. 2 of them were personal injury trial lawyers, and 1 of them voted with them. We beat all 3 of them.
TLR found that winning wasn't enough. Lawmakers listened to those who fund their campaigns.
I learned very, very early on, you talk to people in the legislature about a reform, and if your opponent, and even if they're inclined to support, if the plaintiff trial lawyers have given them $200,000 or $300,000, and we're in here telling them trying to do what's good, you're kind of at a disadvantage.
This is a sentiment that was validated by former TLR supporter Mark Pulliam.
And one of the things that TLR did is not only did they get these laws fixed, but they supported and then defended, when they came up for re-election, the justices on the Texas Supreme Court. And the plaintiff's bar would, from time to time, target these justices with their ringers, and TLR would go to the mattresses.
In the early days of TLR, the political battles they were fighting featured a political foe: trial lawyers, an opponent that was effectively vanquished by 2011. Here's Pulliam again.
they are able to raise tremendous amounts of money election cycle after election cycle by sort of creating this a little bit of a bogeyman that it could all disappear overnight if we didn't maintain our efforts.
FEC Commissioner Trey Traynor, who was appointed to his post by President Donald Trump, explained that TLR's decision to keep going after winning was purposeful.
Given the issue itself, I think had played out. I think they had won, and in most cases you would declare victory and go home. In Texas for Lawsuit Reform's case, looking at it, they are now like most lobby organizations. If they win on their issue, they look for the next big issue and try to morph themselves into something that's there because they want to keep the money flowing to the lobbyists that work for the organization. They want to keep the money flowing.
They keep the money flowing, but now these funds are steered toward protecting incumbents who are loyal to TLR, often at the expense of more conservative challengers. According to Follow the Money's analysis, 46%, nearly half of the PAC's spending, is steered toward incumbent candidates. Spending in open seat races where there is no incumbent comes in at 28%. Challengers seeking to unseat an incumbent come in dead last at 25% of overall spending. You'll recall that the friendly incumbent rule didn't apply to Ken Paxton when he initially ran for the Senate, with TLR opting to stay out of the race and then trying but ultimately failing to unseat Paxton in the 2022 primary. Here's Paxton talking about TLR not supporting his run for Senate in 2012.
Said, we're not supporting you for Texas Senate. We're going to support this guy that has no record, or we're not going to help you at all. I thought that was rather strange, given the fact that I had been supportive of their cause. I went on and won that election. The guy ended up dropping out, but they were not helpful, and they've never been helpful since.
Paxton had run for the Texas Senate in 2012, just 2 years after he challenged then Speaker of the House, Joe Straus, for his seat. Straus was criticized by conservatives for empowering Democrats over the course of his speakership. Speaking of Democrat empowerment, according to Follow the Money, TLR has given $5.7 million to Democrats since 2015. Here's Weekly talking about the dynamics of the Texas legislature in 2021.
But we support Republicans and Democrats, but candidly, we're much more Republican today than Democrat because more Republicans are pro-business than Democrats.
Of course, being more Republican does not mean you're a conservative or support conservative principles. Here's trial attorney Tony Busby characterizing TLR's tension with conservatives in Texas from a podcast last year.
There's apparently a large rift in the Republican Party of the state of Texas. What we have in Texas right now is we have, I would call them the pro-business Republicans fighting the more ideological Republicans. And Texans for Lawsuit Reform is part of the pro-business Republicans. I'm just telling you what they claim they are.
This analysis doesn't fully encapsulate the drama within the Texas GOP, but it's headed in the correct direction based on research and interviews conducted for this podcast. Specifically, the conservative wing of the GOP is pro-business, but also interested in advancing other conservative items. For the better part of the past year, multiple outlets wrote about the civil war within the Texas GOP. On one side are protectionist, pro-business Republicans, backed by TLR. On the other, pro-business, cultural reform-minded conservatives. As Ken Paxton put it,
yeah, I think initially they did it through persuasion. We have an idea, we want to try it. I think they used persuasion and sort of higher calling. We've got some good bills. I think it's changed. Now it's more about the money. They raise, as we know, millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Frustrated conservatives at the national level have complained that establishment Republicans appear more willing to work with Democrats rather than themselves. The same rings true of TLR. But what is problematic about their support of Democrats is TLR's well-stocked war chest and the individual giving of the group's founders. Oftentimes, these contributions and the purchased influence lead to political activity in direct conflict with the desires of conservative voters. Here's attorney Mitch Little explaining the power dynamics in Austin.
I think there is a crony capitalist lobby in Austin that is designed to limit volatility of outcome. And so the billionaires can stay billionaires, their business isn't affected. It doesn't matter if there are children being sex trafficked across the border. It doesn't matter if, one or more lives aren't preserved through pro-life efforts. Their central concern is limiting volatility of outcomes.
Former TLR donor Mark Pulliam describes a recent shift in posture by corporate America.
Corporate America has, over the last 10, 20 years, gone from being basically a Republican Party surrogate, a supporter of tort reform, just part of that, to now, they support a lot of woke policies. They are distancing themselves from Republicans, and particularly conservative Republicans.
Texans for Lawsuit Reform originally helped change Texas from a wild west of lawsuits into a state ripe with economic opportunity. But should their past good deeds guarantee everlasting support? Here's Paxton.
I think generally, most donors to TLR, if they really knew what Dick Weekly and Dick Travolsi were doing, and the sort of sneaky little sleight of hand where they, they're funding against the very interest of their donors, I think some of them would stop giving and they would care about this. So their effectiveness in getting things done that even in the legislature that are good, I don't really see evidence of that like I used to.
Pulliam, a longtime donor to TLR, sums it up.
Well, I think you have to look at an organization's track record, not just what its stated principles are and what its original mission was, but what is it doing today? And if they've gotten off course, then before you decide I'm going to devote my treasure and talent to promoting this organization, is their mission consistent, their current actions consistent with their stated and original mission? And if not, then I would say find another organization to support, or encourage them to get back to their original principles. I think they got a black eye over this. This very competent, shrewd political machine has gone into a ditch.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Exposed. Be sure to tune in next time when we'll dive deeper into how such a group falls from grace. We'd like to thank Mitch Little, Ken Paxton, and Mark Pulliam for taking part in the interviews featured in this episode.
Exposed is a product of Texas Scorecard, the leading source on government and culture in Texas. For more information, go to texasscorecard.com.